Renovating in France while life goes on. My encounter with a stranded cyclist. So the 5th of October, there's a famous bike race, Paris Con which takes place every year, has been doing since I think about 1970. As you can see in the advertising there, it's quite a big event in this part of the world. And it passes through some lovely countryside not far from where I live or where the house is. There you can see that's just the signs showing the cyclists which way to go. Passing through a lovely town called Montmirail, which has got a beautiful chateau there, and it's also a place where I tend to buy my bread through the week. So there you go at that particular boulangerie. Very nice stuff that is there, and it's a lovely little town, Montmirail. And the déchetterie is only a few minutes beyond sort of the town. And hence I'll get to the story of the cyclist, the abandoned or the stranded cyclist. So I've passed through the town. I've gone to the déchetterie. I've offloaded the stuff, the junk, as usual. And as I'm leaving the déchetterie, getting back onto the main road, I see a young guy there with his bike, and he sort of waves me down. So I say, yes, how can I help? And he says, oh, I've had two punches. One puncher sort of this side of Montmirail, and one puncher the other a couple of minutes later, and I've had it. And my mates have continued on. They're heading to Le Mans. He said, how far is Le Mans? I said, wow, it's a good sort of 50 kilometres from here. And he was like, oh, no, no, no. And I said, well, look, there's like a main autoroute, the A11. I said, I can drop you there if you want, if you're going to, don't know what you're going to do, if you're going to do a hitchhike or whatever, or try and catch up with your friends. I said, your friends didn't hang around and wait for you. He said, no, they decided to crack on, and they assumed that the puncture would get sorted out and I'd be catching up with them. And I said, okay. I said, well, look, I'm sorry, but I don't actually live here as such at the moment. I live in Paris. He said, my God. He said, I live in Paris too. What's the odds of that? I said, so what are you doing here? He said, well, it's not exactly a club that he's part of, but him and lots of friends that are very keen cyclists, once perhaps every month or couple of months, they do a long bike ride from, and this one was meant to be from Paris to Nantes, and that's a heck of a distance. I'll tell you, heck of a distance. And they were going to pass through Le Mans. He had decided he was only going to go as far as Le Mans, and I said, then what do you do? Do you find a sort of an Airbnb or whatever through the night, just to briefly stop there? The Meilleur Grimper, that's best climber. So you might see that jumper on the Tour de France with the dots. So that's obviously there's points on this particular part of the race. Anyway, let's get back to the story. So I'm saying to him, so he's saying, are you going to get in like an Airbnb or whatever? And he went, no, I'll get the train back. I said, so you're just going to ride out from Paris to wherever, which is a good 150 kilometres through the course of a day, and then you're going to get the train back. You're not even going to stay over and enjoy the evening or whatever. He went, no, we're like it's like an extreme club, if you like, and they do these wild and crazy things. And I was saying you don't have a voiture de ballet, which is what they call like the brush. I don't know how you translate it. The French, they have like a van normally that they can pick up the waifs and strays if there's any problems, if anybody sort of run out of steam or if they've got punctures or whatever. And he said, no, because we're not a club. We're just like a group of friends that sort of do these things. So anyway, he's also so I then said, well, look, I've had quite a difficult week this week, and I'm heading back to Paris a little bit earlier than usual. I said, if you want, you can put the bike in the back of the car, and I'll drop you back. I said, well, whereabouts do you live in Paris? And he said, Nation. Nation's not too far from the airport, Orly Airport, which is sort of South Paris. So I said, well, look, I actually live at Puteaux, which is like the north west part. If I drop you at La Défense, you can get an RAR train because he can't go on the metro with his bike. They won't allow the metro, but the RAR, you can put bikes and stuff on there. So he said, "Oh, super, super kind of you. Yes, I will do that." So he puts the bike in the back of the car. He comes in, and then we have a sort of a 2 hour chat all the way back to La Défense. And he was a German young guy. He's 33. He just loves the velo. He's actually from Montpellier originally, but he's moved up to Paris donkeys years ago, as lots of people do. You know, in the UK, lots of people move from the north to the south for work. And there's lots of French that move from the south to the north for work. Similar sort of thing. So I think he's a professor of mechanics. I think he was saying, and he teaches. Bizarrely enough, he'd spent a year in Glasgow. So if you know him, I've got my Scottish roots. We're not far from Glasgow. Lanark is the town, my ancestral hometown. And he loved Scotland. And you talk about all sorts of things, don't you, when you first meet someone? And then we're talking about football. And I'm saying, obviously, I follow Bolton Wanderers, and he knew Bolton because there were one or two French players back in our glory days when we were in the Premiership that played for Bolton. And then I said, well, obviously, I'd lived in London for 30 odd years, and I couldn't force Bolton Wanderers onto my children down there, so that we followed Crystal Palace because it was nearest to Club 2 Croydon. And he said, "Oh my God!" He said, "I've been to Crystal Palace ground to watch a match against Wolverhampton Wanderers," and I'm saying, "This is unreal," you know. So yeah, it was a fascinating conversation with the guy. He was ever so grateful, obviously, that well, it was just a pure coincidence, really, that he'd stopped, or that I'd stopped, and that I'd gone to the Shettery at that time, and that he'd broken down at that time, and everything else. And we just continued chatting. Bizarrely enough, although he said he did speak English, but we didn't speak any English at all. We spoke entirely in French. So obviously that helps me because it helps progress my language skills there. And we just talked about loads of different things. So, and then I managed to get him up to La Défense, which is only a few minutes away from where I live in Puto. And there's like La Défense is sort of an elevated section that you need to go up. So we got him. I got him as close to a lift as I could, and then he just, with his bike, he could then get into the lift. He could go up to the top of La Défense, and then you're right by the main station there, and then you can head back down, and he can get himself back to Nation. And in the meantime, he'd phoned his friends and saying, "You won't believe it, I found a guy that's actually lives in Paris, and he's dropping me back there, and it's such a lucky thing." And he phoned his mates. His mates were already just about at Le Mans by the time we managed to contact them by phone, which is amazing, really. Anyway, that's my short story on me and the stranded cyclist. A bit different from the usual content, but I hope you enjoyed it. And there'll be more videos regarding the renovation tomorrow as usual. Anyway, thanks for listening and watching.